So let's move into recommendations that come out of this study specifically. So the practical applications, I have two of those. So the first one is the finding that participants had some physical limitations regarding sexual intercourse positions. That suggests that sex therapists can help individuals and couples by teaching them ways to adapt to these physical challenges with intercourse, or to shift the focus of sexual activity away from intercourse. Because intercourse might not be the thing that that happens in these sexual activities with some of these individuals. But we know the cultural imperative that exists around intercourse being, like, that's what makes sex count. We'll talk a little bit about what counts as sex, what counts as good sex in a little bit here. But this is really suggesting that the heteronormative or the patriarchal attitude around intercourse being the pinnacle of sexual experience might really need to be challenged, especially when it's just not practical or feasible for those kind of positions to work. And that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of other sexual activities that can be done. And it actually means probably strengthening the repertoire of what those sexual activities are to give an alternative to intercourse that may or may not be realistic. So it will be important to ask clients about their physical barriers to sexual positions and how they've managed those challenges. I've heard clients comment about things like, I really miss that sexual intercourse position. And so there might be a bit of mourning or acceptance around, well, that's just not, that's not gonna work here. So what else can we do to still make these sexual experiences very satisfying and meaningful? The other part that this suggests is talking about aids, not the diet pill, not the other cocktail, but for positioning, like bolsters, pillows, occupational therapy kind of resources there that can be really, really helpful. And most people aren't going to think about doing that. They're thinking about, I want to do the sex that I think I'm supposed to be having here, which looks a certain way. And so they might not immediately think this is totally acceptable to add some aids into this activity to make it a bit easier. And so a bit of an acceptance of, okay, this might actually help this. We don't have to force this to happen a certain way that culture has prescribed for us in terms of sexual activity. So the next practical application is that we need to discuss each of these areas, or at least mention them as possible focal points in sex therapy with fat individuals or couples. So we would want to ask, what were the cultural messages that you received about fat and obesity? What have you been exposed to? And how might that impact your sexual experiences, attitudes, and behaviors? Then, what about the childhood messages that you received about fat and obesity, fat phobia, dieting mentality, dieting culture? That is a particular area of importance that maybe people don't recognize too, or maybe some of them do, and it's an area that needs to be discussed. If you have, parents that are saying, you'll never get a husband, no one's going to like you, no one's going to love you, that is going to have some significant ramifications for a relationship, and to feel secure in a relationship and be able to trust that this person is different than the rest of society or different than what parents' messages have been. So the next part is we need to discuss ideas of attractiveness. So this is where we can talk about, so what helps you feel attractive? What's the context in which you start to emerge with a sense of attractiveness or confidence? How can we build that context to elicit the body's responses around attractiveness and confidence, if that's what you choose to do, if that's where you want to go with it? Obviously, clients don't have to do that. That's always their choice. So we are discussing about that, the attractiveness, the confidence, and probably talking about what was it like to try and date as a fat person? What have your experiences been there? I think we've all heard from our clients horror stories about that, about trying to online date, meeting someone, seeing what they look like, which may be a surprise, and what happens next. I've heard so many of those stories, even just, showing up and then someone taking one look at you and then they just leave. It's horrible, but those are kind of traumatic elements of dating within a fat body that might really be relevant when we're trying to help with sexual health concerns. So for future research, I would really like to see more about the strength and nature of childhood messages and its correlation to body appreciation, because that one really stood out for me. Of every participant who had negative messages and a lot of fat phobia messages, just did not appreciate their bodies to the same extent that others who had different messages did. And again, this is a sample size of 10 from one city, which means it would be really important to see if this kind of transcends this setting and sample. And then more understanding of how these buffers actually protect individuals. So what is the relationship around secure attachment here? Relationship security, how individuals protect themselves from potentially adverse sexual experiences. So research has suggested a lot about secure attachment, and that secure attachment could predict positive sexual perceptions and experiences. The secure attachment occurs when an individual is able to take vulnerable risks with their partner because they trust that their partner will love and accept them as a safe haven or as a secure base in order to take on these risks. Avoidant attachment is when an individual avoids some of this vulnerable contact with their partner because of some insecurity about the bond or a threat to the bond. So when these individuals perceive separation distress, their organizing behavior is around an avoidance of the vulnerability and potential conflict. These avoidance behaviors are similar to what came out in this study about avoidance of dating and sexual experiences that participants perceive to be due to weight. So there may be some kind of link between secure attachment in childhood, which may relate directly to the messages from parents about fat and just acceptance and rejection about diversity of human experience in general. So there may be a link between the avoidance behaviors exhibited by some of the fat participants, the fat females, and a more general adaptation related to avoidant attachment. So as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about how there's almost this cultural imperative towards an avoidant attachment. And if that is not buffered, that may be a natural or a popular destination that our clients may end up. Then the last recommendation for future research is about how these parental messages interact with cultural messages. Can parental messages buffer against very negative cultural messages, or vice versa? Could we help individuals by putting them in a space of body positivity that might buffer other messages, maybe from parents or from dating experiences? But we don't really know exactly how that's working right now. And of course, the real next logical line of this research is to collect a sample from another city and to explore how similar and different the findings end up being from that. So, in summary of this study, so part of how this is set up too is that there's a vulnerability with this population, with fat individuals, an extreme vulnerability with all healthcare providers. And we as healthcare providers have done such a historical disservice to this group of individuals, telling them that losing weight is the answer, which sends them into a tailspin of fat phobia and diet cycling that just serves to reinforce that they can't actually get to where they're supposed to get, which makes them feel rejected by society and by others, and then an anticipation of rejection and not being accepted by the rest of society. So we really have a responsibility from a place of privilege in being able to help support our clients, to be able to really offer them what is actually going to be helpful. And what's actually going to be helpful is secure attachment, feelings of acceptance, feelings that acceptance can translate into vulnerability, and that vulnerability bringing with it the connection that all of us need. So yeah, I would love to see kind of different samples all over North America a bit, and see, how transferable these 7 themes that I got are to other populations.